Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Compelling Conversations podcast. Tonight, I'm joined by a very kind man, Eesa. Eesa, thanks so much for being here, bro.
Yeah, no, sure thing. Thank you so much for inviting me. This was a very pleasant surprise for me, and I'm really happy that you thought I was worth the time to come and have this conversation with you.
Absolutely, bro. Where are you joining us from?
So I'm actually currently in Austin. I'm working here, interning over the summer. So I'm from my little apartment that I've rented out with a few friends. How about
Awesome.
yourself?
I'm joining in from Cyprus. You're my second
Cyprus.
Austinite, bro. So this
Nice.
is really cool. I wanted to begin by saying that you're a very kind person, and I say that sincerely because anytime I've met you, you've always given me that same sort of that energy, that sincere energy, that charisma. It's always been the same anytime I've met you. It's never like changed. With some people, you meet them at a first impression and it's all great. But once that first impression's gone, the bar gets set lower and they don't really like care to kind of keep that up. But for yourself, that kindness never wavered. So where do you think that comes from?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, and I'm very honored that you think so highly of me, and that you're willing to overlook any faults that I might have. But I think personally, I think it's best to just, and this is something I've had to work on a lot, honestly. It's a constant thing to that I've been working on, but just to treat everyone with kindness as like a baseline. Um, because as I've grown up and sort of just been thinking a lot, especially over COVID, I think a lot of us had a lot of alone time during quarantine to kind of just think and look at kind of the person we were. And I sort of realized that maybe like I wasn't super nice, and that's not saying like I was out here being like terrible to people, but more of just like what can I do better? What are small changes like I can make that aren't necessarily, hurting my bank account, or like, as a student, right? Like you don't have a lot of, you can't go donate to every charity. Um, and then, you start to, I think personally for me, a lot of it came from starting to learn more about my religion, um, learning more about Islam and the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there's beautiful things in there, like it's sunnah to smile, right? A smile is charity, like stuff like that, like things that are so easy to implement in your life. um that if you're consistent with them and you're constantly reminding yourself to kind of quote unquote put your best foot forward, always, you hear how the Prophet ﷺ used to, when like he would speak to someone, he'd turn his whole body towards them. Or that, there was a companion who, unfortunately I forget his name, but he had joined, much later than the other companions. And the way the Prophet ﷺ treated everyone, he still thought that he was, the favorite of the Prophet. So everyone thought that he was there, they were his favorite because of how like amazing and how kind and how much time and effort he put into his relationships and making everyone feel good. And this might sound corny, but there's always also like the golden rule, like treat others how you want to be treated. And I kind of look towards people that I admire, and a few close friends of mine, that I admire, or just random people that I look up to, who I'm blessed to have close interactions with. And they're the one thing is that they always, even when I disagree with them, they're always attentive, and they're it's always all good in them. There's never hard feelings. They're not holding grudges even when we disagree. And so I like that a lot. Um and I think honestly, it's just, it feels good, like just to be good to people. I remember when I first met you, I believe at Dean Intensive and back in February, here at the University of Texas. It was just that was it was a good thing. It was just guys chilling. You guys, I believe you guys were walking in, and I was like, these guys seem cool. Like, why would I jeopardize that? Why would why would I alienate that?
Yeah. Yeah, you were, I think you were like one of the first guys I met that night. Like, oh hey, how's it going, dude? Oh yeah, Misa, nice,
Yeah.
nice. Yeah, and that cool little suit you had on. It was a
Oh
good
yeah,
time, man. It was a good time.
that
Yeah,
was a good
you
time.
actually is I'm very glad you mentioned this because that leads me to another thing where on top of this kindness, you were a very hospitable host,
Hmm.
and that is also a very important thing because I'm coming in from Houston to Austin, right? Different places.
Yeah.
And you were just like very nice. Hey, do you need anything here? Let me take you here. This is what's going on. You took that time to be very hospitable. And I really appreciate that as well.
Yeah, I mean, for one's like Jazakallah khair for, being so kind in your view of me. Um and also like, you had taken the time out. I mean, I'm in Austin. I could like it was just like I was living in dorms at the time, so it was just like a 5 minute walk, maybe. So it was easy for me, but a lot of people, it's not necessarily that easy. You know, Traveling, it also was, some people had classes. I remember one brother saying he had like an exam and he'd come all the way from, I forget if it was Dallas or Houston. I remember one brother was on his laptop taking an exam.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. There was. Yeah. I do remember that.
um, so yeah, I mean, also I was the volunteer lead at DI at the time, so I there was that further kind of incentive, like, okay, like I have a responsibility now, like other volunteers are kind of looking to me, and honestly, I think the entire UT community that I've seen, alhamdulillah, is very, very hospitable and very kind. All the brothers I've met here, I mean, I'm a freshman, or I was a freshman. I'm going to be a sophomore, inshallah. But I mean, they took me in almost immediately. Like, they're like, "Yo, bro, like, what's up? Like, let's go get food. Let's do this." It's kind of an extension of that, and I think it's just a also a testament to the culture we've kind of built here as Muslims on the UT campus. That we're always, welcoming people. New faces are always welcome, always loved, and so, yeah, seeing you guys there was great, man. It was a good time, and I'm like, alhamdulillah, I'm really blessed to have met you and all of the other guys at DI. That was great.
Yeah, it certainly was. Before you mentioned about the whole pandemic and how that solitude had, in a way, changed you, if I'm not mistaken. Well,
Hmm.
actually, let me ask you, did it change you?
Yeah, honestly, I think it accelerated a change that was already slowly occurring as I went
What
into my.
sort of change was that, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, yeah, sure thing. Honestly, a lot of it was just me focusing more on prioritizing my deen, on really trying to memorize more Quran, which I'd neglected for a while before that. And start praying 5 times a day, and kind of, it's unfortunate, but I'd kind of like been slacking on my religion before that, and then I was kind of like, I'm not sure if I can pinpoint it to one moment, but there was definitely a time when I was just like slowly started realizing that things needed to change, and so slowly started implementing small things that kind of grew. Um,
When you were in that phase of kind of like slacking on your faith, how did you feel? And what was that impetus that moved you to becoming more godly or sainted? No, no, that's not the right word, but religious, I suppose.
yeah, religious,
Suppose.
um, quote unquote religious, right? Like,
Yeah. It
um, there's no good word for it, I feel, but you're
yeah.
right. Honestly, I look back then. And I'm sure there were moments when I felt good. Like looking back, I know that things are wrong, but I think in our society these days, there's a really big kind of idea of sort of just fulfilling your desires. The instant gratification is really big. And so it's just like any drug, you're always chasing that high, whether it's, talking to girls or like um, I don't know, like, but the point I'm getting at is that the the idea of slowing down and like making time for prayer, making time for religion, making time for something that doesn't necessarily have an immediate effect on you. Like if I make the law for like $1 million, that's not going to come right in my hands, right? But I'm taking time out of my day to make that dua. If I'm praying Fajr, you know, there that's not I don't see anything immediately after that. I've just woken up at like 6 a.m. when I was up all night studying um to take time out to take time, pray Fajr, and then maybe go back to bed, maybe do whatever. But there's that you've taken time out of your day, and so I think prayer has and becoming more religious has led me to kind of change my mindset about a lot of things. So now looking back, I'm like, did I really feel good at that time? Because there are definitely times when I felt good. I mean, or else like why would you be non-religious if it didn't feel good, quote unquote non-religious?
Yeah.
And it's a very hard to explain because it's hard to internalize your emotions and really, especially looking back on them, really be like, like how did I feel at this moment in time? But I can definitely say that I'm very happy where I am now, alhamdulillah, and I'm very grateful. And I mean, we're all still working to be better, but I think I've gone out of a rut. And honestly, coming back to UT, or not coming back, coming to UT, getting more involved in the community and going to things like Dean Intensive really accelerated that and really helped that, kind of build. So I feel like that time was really a blessing because it gave me kind of a foundation to where I could find, more guidance from others
Mm,
around.
that's really cool. I wanted to dive into poetry.
Of
You're a
course.
poet, and
Somewhat. I try.
yeah, you've got some amazing things that you've put together.
So,
My first question for you is there a particular line that you've written that is your favorite line and why?
favorite line, let's see. There's definitely a few that I really liked. I don't think you've heard this one poem, but there was a it was at so Oasis Mosque, the mosque on campus has a poetry night. And so that was the first time I've ever said a poem in front of anyone other than like I think my parents. So that actually I didn't even say it in front of them. I just gave my dad a piece of paper and like ran away. um that was my experience with like sharing my stuff. But I don't
Yeah.
know, I was just like, why not? Like I'm gonna um I wrote a poem about kind of just where like me as a person and where I stand as sort of, Muslim American, second generation, child of children of immigrants kind of deal, where it's like, how do I fit in? And the line was, you know, um, I feel like a broken puzzle piece, or no, sorry, I feel like an extra puzzle piece because where do I go when the picture of me is already complete?
Mm,
Um,
what does that
because
mean?
so it was kind of just saying like I know who I am and I know
Who
like
are you?
where I stand kind of like as a person, like I'm
Yeah.
very proud to be Muslim, I'm very, you know, proud to be, American, proud of my heritage as well. But when I interact with different people, there's different sort of semblances of myself that kind of get just like left out. And so
Hmm.
I feel like I never really am able to, or when I was writing the piece, I was never really able to fit into anyone else's image of kind of who I was. It was that like that sort of, I was just kind of like grouped into like one of these like categories. So it's, you're Muslim, you're hanging out with all the Muslim guys, you're doing this, or someone might see me and be like, oh, that's Eesa. He's, Indian, smart, whatever. Like he does engineering. It's really hard and for me to kind of express what that exactly means, but the sentiment was at least that sort of I'm like as an individual, I'm not very like people can't really see me. I don't it's a very hard thing to put into words that aren't poetic phrases, I guess. But
I really
the
like that actually.
yeah.
It's a very interesting play on words, an extra puzzle piece. And the puzzle's already completed. Like it really inspires different ideas inside of me that I don't think I've paused to reflect on. At least not in the way that you have articulated it, which is really cool.
No,
Uh, yeah, go ahead.
sorry. I was gonna say I like that because honestly, when I write poetry, many times I don't even really want to share what it means to me because I know that the general idea of what I'm writing is going to get across no matter what. But there's just these certain very, beautiful personal things that sometimes people can take from poetry. Because I know that I take that from it when I'm writing. So that's also why a lot of poems that at least the ones that I share, kind of have these broader themes. If you remember my poem at DI, um,
Which is a cool one, very cool one.
yeah, that touched on a lot of different things, and
Yeah.
honestly, everything was very dear to me, but a lot of it I also couldn't relate to. But I knew that there was someone out there who probably could relate to it,
Mm.
and sort of being able to internalize that and put that into words was very helpful in writing that.
That is very interesting. Anytime I write something, I write it just from my own anecdotal experiences, be
Mm-hmm.
that literal or metaphorical. But I've never thought about, let me write something and okay, I have no connection to this, but somebody else probably does. It's very
Yeah,
fascinating that you mentioned that.
yeah, it's definitely something I didn't exactly do before DI, at least not consciously. But I felt like I had a captive audience. I needed to do something to that, and but just because I don't relate to it doesn't necessarily mean that there's not some sort of feelings I have about it, or I can't, speak about it. It's the same way that when you look at certain activist movements around the world, there's I do I necessarily relate to the struggles of like the Palestinian people or the Rohingyas in Myanmar, or Kashmiris. Like I'm alhamdulillah, I'm very privileged, so I don't have that. But I know there's people out there who can relate to it on a much greater scale emotionally than I could ever, think of. So that was what happened with some of the lines in that poem. It was trying to kind of separate the general sentiments we have about things and make it more personal, even though I maybe couldn't exactly relate to it, if that makes sense. The first part about struggles with faith was totally me, but then other things, the environment was something touched on there, and then also you know something that I feel very strongly about, but have been blessed not to necessarily experience. Well, the domestic abuse was touched on in there, both from a parent spousal perspective and from a parent to child perspective, and all of these touched on in the context of various religious justifications people have for these terrible actions, and sort of quote unquote what might be considered like religious abuse. using the dean in a way which harms someone. uh
Happens. Yeah.
yeah, so that was definitely one thing that I really felt strongly about, but as I said, alhamdulillah, I haven't had much experience about with. So, but I knew there's, maybe there was someone out there that could relate more to that, and maybe my words could help in some way. At least let them know that they're heard.
You went to Italy and you wrote a very
Yes.
picturesque poem on Rome. I'm
Yeah.
curious if you could recite that for us and
Yeah.
then interpret the meaning behind that.
Sure. Let me pull it up real quick.
Sure.
Yeah. I think I've actually said this one out loud, so let's cut me some slack here. All right, this one's called Roma because I was feeling Italian and to write it in its native tongue. Okay. He gazes down from behind cracked eyes, a prisoner sentenced to never die. His fingerless hand outstretched points to where the trees kiss the sky, where olives bathe in a nurturing light and a wind blows rough, though not unkind. And here I stand beneath the memories of long dead men whose chisel marks slowly fade. A church bell calls to end the day. So that was
It's
the
such a brilliant poem. I love the way that it just kind of boom, 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 boom. It's got a very cool rhythm to it. What inspired that?
um I was at the believe it may have been the not the it was in a part of Rome right across from the Colosseum. I believe it's called the Forum. And it was kind of like Rome's old, I believe, capital or something. But they had a bunch of statues there, these like very almost like stereotypical like ancient statue, like cracked hands, and half the face is like cut off and it's just like smooth with from like erosion over the years with little cracks and like everything. And so I saw a bunch of those um around and everywhere in Italy on and that kind of got the first stanza of the poem. The second stanza was just observing kind of the nature of Italy, uh, and just the atmosphere. Because I think this was the first one of the first poems that I've written where um, it wasn't written in a moment of sort of like kind of like pain. I guess it was this was the first poem I've written. I think where I've been very. I wrote it because of how calm I felt. I felt very good, very sort of introspective, kind of just taking a step back. And that's why, there's not necessarily a lot of emotions in this one. It's more of trying to paint a picture of something that I found very beautiful. So that was the inspiration behind it, just trying to encapsulate sort of what Italy and how I was feeling there.
Hmm, that's really cool. I especially like that line about the chisel. It speaks. It reminds me of that poem Ozymandias. I don't know if you ever heard of it.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah,
That's one of my favorite poems, actually.
it's a great
Um,
poem. It's a very perennial truth. It just kind of flows
yeah,
through history.
the impermanence of man. It's very.
Yeah, yeah, that's a big thing, huh? So with the impermanence of man,
Mhm.
I'm curious, do you want to leave a legacy behind? And if so, what is that legacy in that scale of the impermanence of man?
You know, honestly, that's something that I think about a lot. And I used to think about even more. um, the answers definitely changed over the years. And if you ask me again, honestly, in like 6 months, maybe the answer will be different. But I think as I stand right now, I'm not sure if what. Sorry, let me take a step back. I guess we should sort of like what do you mean by legacy? Because there's certain things that I leave behind when I die that such as like a lineage, inshallah, like a lineage of people who do good is what I think everyone, yeah, kind of wants. And that would be enough for me, honestly. Maybe at this moment, if I died like right now, like what would I want? Like maybe my poems, maybe I would want those. But as we were discussing, the impermanence of man, I mean, eventually these, the paper will crumple, the poems might be lost. So I'm
There's
not really sure.
yeah. No, and I don't blame you. It's one of those questions where it's ineffable sometimes. And
Yeah.
I was talking to Yasir um on this podcast a couple of days ago, and we were talking about this verse in the Quran where God says everything perishes
Yeah.
except for like me. And it's like, wow, like, yeah, that's true. And in that, I feel like there's hope, but I feel like some people could just find that like, hopeless. Like, well, what am I doing?
I think
But yeah. Oh, well, actually, sorry, real quick. The reason I mentioned this was I was talking to him about as an artist, I feel like there's like a pet there's a conflict there because you as an artist you feel like you really do want to leave something behind, but it all perishes and sometimes that messes with the conscience.
yeah, it's definitely a good point. And I did write a poem about this a while ago that I forgot, but I'll try and share it with you one of these days. Um, it's a lot of inner turmoil sometimes because on one hand, I do really, I really value kind of the things I've written. Um, I think some of these poems are things that I would like people to read. And, maybe they don't even read my name at the end. Maybe they don't, maybe my name is lost, but like they read it and they're like, wow, like this is very poignant. This, at the very least, there's someone's out here who understands. This is, I think the highest compliment anyone could ever give me would be like, if they were like, wow, like I didn't even know how to put into words what I was feeling, but this was perfect
Mm,
or something like that.
yeah.
Or at the very least being relatable. So there's a sense of I want these things to live on. I want people to find joy in this and to talk about this and share ideas. I wanted to be a room for discuss or to sorry to spark discussion. And at the same time, there is sort of an acceptance of even without taking into account the fact that everything dies, just like there's an inner turmoil of like, was this good enough? Like, will anyone ever sort of think it's worth saving? And that's another thing that I've been thinking of. And then, of course, you brought in the verse from the Quran where everything does eventually die. And honestly, I think for me there is like you said, it's a double edged sword of sorts because on one hand there's solace in that and knowing that there's a final sort of a final end to everything, that everything comes to a close. But then at the same time, it's tough because you're like, well, that means that my art, my lineage, everything will die. But then there's the hereafter. So
You said something so cool. You said, maybe my name could get lost. And I think it's so interesting that, your name is Isa, which means Jesus in Arabic. From an
mhm.
Islamic tradition, we believe to the world the name of Christ lives on, but who he was is actually lost. I
Yes.
think it's a very interesting juxtaposition there. Is there a story or yeah, is there something about Christ and his life that to you you find, I don't know, something you really resonate with, seeing that it's your name.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely kind of looked into that quite a bit. The original story, in Surah Maryam, the story of Christ, of Jesus, of Eesa. Um, and it's very interesting to me. I remember when I was little, there was a khutbah. My dad told me this story. I was about 3 years old, maybe four, and there's a khutbah, and this was the first. It was about Isa alayhi salam. This is the first time that and he noted. My dad noticed this was the first time I was like paying attention, and so he goes to me and he's like, "Did you like the khutbah?" And confidently I say, "Yeah, he was talking about me." Um, but I think what really resonated to me when it comes to the story of Isa is that despite all of his miracles, I think he had, aside from Sulaiman alayhi salam, he had some of the most miracles in the Quran. He did so many of these crazy things that, or maybe crazy isn't the right word, but just very
Miraculous.
miraculous. Yeah, thank you. And yet he had so few followers in his lifetime. And to me, that just kind of shows that, if people are going to be misled or um, aren't going to necessarily be with you on something, sometimes there's just nothing you can do. There's that
Yeah.
verse from I'm sorry if I forget if it's I think it might be a hadith, but where the I believe the Quraysh had asked the Prophet ﷺ for like a mountain of gold to appear, and he said, and then Allah Subhanahu wa Taala said, like they would still disbelieve even after that, and it'd be worse for them because then they would see certain signs of
Mm.
and still disbelieve. And that's one thing that I've thought of a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
no, this is a really, really cool thing you mentioned because there's this film on Van Gogh called At Eternity's Gate,
mhm,
starring Willem Dafoe.
really,
And Van Gogh, I don't know if you're familiar with his life, but
yeah,
everybody
very
around him, they
sad.
just thought his art was trash, and it's ugly. And there's a
Yeah,
scene in the film where a priest visits him, played by Mads Mikkelsen, and he says, like this is ugly stuff. Like, why are you doing this? And Van Gogh in the film is like, well, why would God create me to paint ugly things? Maybe what I create is not for these people. It's not for this time. It's not for this generation, but
yeah,
perhaps it's for another time, another generation, another people. And he relates this to the story of Christ. And he's
yeah,
like, for so many years, like even after Christ vanished, people didn't really talk about him or believe in him. It wasn't until years later where, they took an interest in him.
yeah,
So I think it's very cool that you said that because it also ties into art. Like
yeah.
you never know. You never know where it's gonna, what time or what place it'll be for.
I agree. It's a very interesting example you brought up. I like that.
Yeah. I was wondering, Issa, do you have any closing thoughts? Anything that you wanted to say, but you felt like you didn't get a chance to, or anything on your mind that you wanted to express?
I think. I mean, first off, just thanks for inviting me to do this. This was very cool. Um, Honored to have met you. What is it,
Likewise.
6 months ago? And I'm glad that we could talk, and inshallah, I hope we talk more in the future about a variety of topics, um, whether or not it's on a podcast, right? Um, but yeah, I just think for me, this was a very good experience, and I enjoy being able to sort of just express my thoughts in front of, to you, and it's great. So yeah, I guess my closing thoughts are just thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad that you made it, man. I mean, this was a very cool, reflective conversation. We kind of surfed a wave of different things, and it was really cool. You know, um, but thanks so much, man, for being here.
Mhm.
Um, And you take care, yeah? And till I see you again, inshallah.
Inshallah. You as well, man.
All right, you take care then, yeah?
All right. Same.